Camera sat in the back of the classroom, her eyes glued to the pages of her book. The low hum of chatter from her classmates filled the air, but it felt distant, like the murmur of a storm on the horizon. She didn't mind being invisible. In fact, she preferred it that way. Her fingers traced the edge of the book, the ink on the page blending into the background of her thoughts. The words on the page offered her an escape, a space where she didn't have to face the noise of the world outside. It had been like this for years, quiet, solitary, comfortable in its stillness. Camera's life was simple, a routine of school, home, and the small sanctuary she found in her room, where she practiced martial arts. She'd taken it up a few years ago, as a way to deal with her anger, with the trauma that seemed to hang over her life like a shadow. It gave her control in a world that often felt like it was slipping out of her grasp. Her mother had died when Camera was just 12, the illness coming on quickly and taking her away even faster. That loss had left a hole in her heart, one that her father, a quiet, emotionally distant man, had never known how to fill. He provided for her, made sure she had what she needed, but there was no warmth in their relationship. No understanding. He had his own way of coping with his grief, and Camera had hers. But grief had a way of making people disappear, sometimes literally, and sometimes figuratively. It was how Camera came to be the quiet girl in the back. She wasn't sure when it had happened, but at some point, she had simply stopped reaching out. It was easier that way. Safer. No one expected anything from her. No one paid attention. And she was fine with that. The lunch bell rang, and the classroom emptied into the cafeteria, a constant wave of motion Camera didn't have the energy to join. She hung back, letting the flood of students pass her by, walking at a steady pace toward the cafeteria's back corner. It was the same spot every day. She knew where the tables were empty, where no one would bother her. She slid into her seat, pulling her lunch from her backpack, the simple, solitary routine of it comforting. Across the room, she could hear the chatter of her classmates, the clinking of trays, and the laughter of the popular kids. She never really understood how it all worked, the cliques, the power plays. But it wasn't something she felt the need to understand. She'd learned to accept her place on the outskirts, an observer rather than a participant. The quiet girl. The girl who read her books, ate her lunch, and didn't make waves. But today felt different. Camera couldn't put her finger on why, but something in the air was off. She felt a ripple, a shift. And as she turned the page of her book, she realized too late that someone had approached her. "Hey, quiet girl." Camera stiffened, her eyes still on her book, though her heart had already started to race. It was Jake, one of the more popular, and more notorious, students at Southbrook High. He had a reputation for being cruel, a bully who always seemed to be looking for a way to make others feel small. "Don't you have any friends?" Jake's voice was loud, mocking. He leaned over her, his breath hot on her neck. "Or do you just prefer being a freak? I can't believe you actually sit by yourself every day like some kind of loser." Camera kept her gaze fixed on the page in front of her, trying to ignore him, to keep herself calm. This wasn't new. Jake had taunted her before, along with his group of friends. She had learned long ago to keep her head down, to avoid the conflict that was always bubbling just beneath the surface. The silence was her shield. But Jake didn't stop. He knocked her book out of her hands, the sudden movement jolting her out of her thoughts. "What's the matter? Don't like talking to people? Is that it? Too shy for a real conversation?" Camera clenched her fists, feeling the familiar surge of frustration bubble up in her chest. She wanted to say something. She wanted to defend herself, to tell him that she wasn't a freak, that she wasn't what he called her. But the words wouldn't come. She just sat there, frozen, unsure of how to respond. Jake grinned, watching her discomfort. He took a step back and turned to his friends, who were standing a few feet away, eagerly watching the scene unfold. They always found amusement in Camera's pain, in watching her squirm. "Hey, guys," Jake called over his shoulder, his voice louder now. "You know what would be funny? If we gave Quiet Girl a little makeover." Camera's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, her pulse quickening. She knew what was coming. She had seen Jake do this before, pick on someone who couldn't fight back, who wouldn't fight back. But something about the way he was grinning now, something about the gleam in his eyes, made her stomach churn. One of Jake's friends, Ben, a tall, lanky kid with a smirk that matched Jake, suddenly appeared at her side, holding a pair of scissors. Camera's eyes widened. The cafeteria seemed to go silent, or maybe it was just her that had stopped hearing anything else. Ben stepped closer, the scissors gleaming in the light, and before she could react, he reached down and grabbed a handful of her hair. "Let's see how quiet you are after this," Jake sneered. Camera's heart hammered in her chest. She tried to pull away, but Ben's grip was too strong. The scissors snipped, cutting through her hair with a sickening ease. A chunk of her hair fell to the floor in front of her. Camera's hands shot up, trying to protect what was left, but it was too late. The damage was done. Laughter erupted around her. Camera's face burned with humiliation, her cheeks flushed with anger and embarrassment. The laughter echoed in her ears, louder than any sound she had ever heard. "Guess you're not so quiet now, huh?" Jake taunted, his voice dripping with cruelty. Camera stared down at the floor, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She could feel the weight of the stares from the other students, the sense of being exposed, of being broken open in front of them. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to fight back. But all she could do was sit there, her hands trembling in her lap, her heart aching. The scissors were gone, and so were Jake and his friends. But the damage they had done lingered, heavy and suffocating. Camera's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them away. She wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not now. As the noise of the cafeteria slowly returned to its normal rhythm, Camera slowly picked up her book from the floor, clutching it tightly in her hands. She stood up and walked to the bathroom without looking at anyone. But inside, she knew something had shifted. The quiet girl in the back was no longer invisible. The world had finally noticed her. And for the first time, Camera wasn't sure if she was ready to be seen. Camera's footsteps were slow as she walked down the street, her head hung low. The whispers from the schoolyard still echoed in her ears, each one like a weight pressing harder and harder against her chest. The taunts, the cruel laughter, the feeling of being exposed, it was too much. She didn't think she could ever fully shake off the sound of Cassie's mocking voice, the way her classmates had all joined in, amplifying the humiliation. Every inch of Camera's body felt violated, as if something sacred had been ripped away from her, leaving her raw and vulnerable. Her hair, her pride, her identity was gone. The long, dark braids that had been so intricately woven, the part of her that had made her feel unique and confident, was now just a distant memory. She could feel the coolness of the air against her scalp, the exposed skin where once her hair had rested. It was as though her very dignity had been shorn off along with the braids. She couldn't shake the feeling that without her hair, she was invisible, lost in a world that had always seemed to ignore her, but now, she was doubly unseen. Camera wanted to cry. She wanted to crumble into herself, to scream, to let it all out. She wanted to smash the world into pieces for what it had just done to her. But something in her, the part of her that had always pushed through, always tried to be better, stronger, braver, held it back. Instead of breaking down, Camera walked home in silence, her heart beating erratically in her chest. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion. She wanted to stop walking. She wanted to curl up in a ball and disappear, but she didn't. She couldn't. So she kept walking. The neighborhood was quieter than usual, the early evening sun casting long shadows across the street. Camera turned the corner to her house, the familiar sight of the porch and front door offering her a strange comfort. But inside, she knew there would be no relief. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, maybe her mother's soothing voice, a hug to make everything feel okay again, but the truth was, Camera knew no one could fix this. Not in the way she wanted. The front door creaked open as she pushed it with her shoulder, stepping inside. She didn't bother to take off her shoes, nor did she acknowledge her mother's voice calling from the kitchen. Camera walked straight past the living room, ignoring the few faint glances her mother gave her. She didn't want to explain what had happened. Not yet. Not when it all felt too raw, too fresh, too suffocating. Instead, Camera made her way to her room. She didn't bother with the lights. The darkness of the room seemed to welcome her, its quiet comfort enveloping her. She closed the door behind her and locked it, shutting herself off from the outside world. The soft hum of the air conditioning was the only sound now, a backdrop to the chaos that churned inside her. For a long moment, Camera stood at the center of her room, her fists clenched at her sides. The tears she had fought so hard to suppress welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. She wouldn't let her weakness be exposed, not when she had worked so hard to build the walls around her. She slowly sank to the floor, crossing her legs. Camera's mother had taught her to meditate when she was younger. It had started as a way to calm her restless energy, a way to clear her mind before big moments, before tests, before competitions, before life's challenges. It had always worked, but tonight, it felt more necessary than ever. Camera closed her eyes, placing her hands gently on her knees, her fingers resting lightly on the fabric of her pants. The room was silent now, save for the soft rhythm of her breath. She focused on that rhythm, drawing in air through her nose, feeling her lungs expand, and then exhaling slowly through her mouth. She imagined herself floating, weightless, suspended in a world that wasn't bound by the chaos of the day. Her mind, though cluttered with anger and frustration, slowly began to quiet. Her mother's voice drifted to her from the memory, a soft, steady tone. Camera, remember your strength. It is inside you. It's not just in your body, it's in your mind, your heart. Every moment is a chance to control your response. That is power. Camera remembered the feeling of her mother's hands on her back, steadying her as she performed the katas in their backyard. The way her mother's guidance had always been gentle but firm, like a river that cut through stone, persistent, calm, unyielding. Camera's body had learned the movements like second nature, but it was her mother's lessons about resilience, about maintaining peace amidst the storm, that had shaped her. Camera's anger swirled inside her, but she refused to let it control her. Instead, she focused on the discipline, on the strength that her mother had imparted to her. The martial arts training was more than just self-defense, it was a philosophy, a way of seeing the world and choosing how to interact with it. She had always thought of it as a means of protection, but now, in this moment, it was more than that. It was a way to reclaim herself. With each breath, Camera found a little more peace. The turmoil inside her didn't go away, but it began to soften. She wasn't the girl who had been humiliated in front of her classmates. She wasn't the girl who had been laughed at, her identity stripped away. She was Camera's strong, capable, and unbroken. Her mother had always said that the greatest warriors were not those who fought the hardest, but those who could control their own emotions. Camera had always struggled with that. She had always been quick to react, quick to let her anger burn hot and bright. But tonight, in the silence of her room, she realized the truth in her mother's words. Her reaction was what would define her. How she chose to rise from this would determine her strength. Camera's fists unclenched, her fingers relaxing into a loose, open position. She was no longer holding onto the anger, no longer letting it control her. She was going to choose how to respond. She was going to fight for herself, not with violence or rage, but with the quiet strength that had always been inside her. The more Camera focused on her breath, the more she felt the tightness in her chest loosen. The anger didn't disappear, but it became manageable. She could feel it, bubbling just beneath the surface, but it no longer consumed her. And then, in that quiet solitude, Camera realized something that felt like both a revelation and a declaration of power. This moment, this loss, this violation, this was the beginning of her reclaiming control. The bullies might have thought they had taken something from her, but what they didn't know was that they had only lit the fuse to a fire that she could now direct. She was going to take this moment when she felt humiliated, weak, and vulnerable, and turn it into her strength. She was going to rise from this, stronger than before. Camera wasn't broken. Not now, not ever. With that thought, she stood up, her body slow but purposeful. She walked to the mirror and took one last look at herself. Her face was still marked with the remnants of the day's struggle, but her eyes were different now. There was a quiet, simmering power behind them, a resolve that had been forged in the fire of her pain. She wasn't done. Camera had just begun. Camera stood in front of the mirror in her room, staring at her reflection. The girl looking back at her didn't seem like the same person who had walked into school that morning. There was a fire behind her eyes, something she hadn't noticed before, or perhaps, something she'd buried for far too long. The incident in the hallway still burned in her mind. Jake's taunting voice, his friend's cruel laughter, the feeling of being small and powerless, it was like a shadow that clung to her, suffocating her. She had been that girl, the quiet one, the invisible one, the one who didn't fight back. But not anymore. Camera wasn't going to let them keep her in that box. She had spent too long hiding, letting others define her. Today, that changed. The old dojo was tucked away in a quiet part of the city, far from the bustle of the streets Camera was used to. She had been training there in secret for the last 2 years, after her mother signed her up for lessons in an attempt to get her out of the house and doing something productive. At first, it was just a way to kill time, a hobby she didn't really take seriously. But as the months passed, she began to understand something deeper about martial arts. It was more than just physical exercise. It was about control, focus, and discipline. It was about mastering yourself. Today, she needed that more than ever. Camera pushed open the door to the dojo, the familiar scent of wood and sweat filling her senses. The mats were worn, the walls adorned with old posters of famous martial artists. There was a calmness here, a sense of order that grounded her. She wasn't alone. Sensei Jun, a stern but kind older man, was adjusting some equipment by the wall. His eyes flickered up when she entered. He was used to seeing her at odd hours, usually after school when no one else was around. She had always been an average student, a quiet one who didn't stand out, but she never missed a practice. "Camera," he greeted her with a nod. "Late practice today?" She nodded. "I need to train harder. I want to push myself." Her voice was steady, more confident than she'd ever sounded in this space before. Sensei Jun didn't ask any questions. He simply studied her for a moment, then gestured to the mats. "Then show me." Camera didn't hesitate. She removed her jacket and set it aside, her movements swift and deliberate. The fight wasn't physical yet, but she could feel it building inside her, the frustration, the anger, the need to prove something to herself. She began with her warm-up routine, the movements smooth and fluid as she stretched and prepared her body. Her muscles groaned, the tension in her legs and arms like coiled springs. But the more she pushed, the more the tightness began to fade. There was a rhythm to her movements now, graceful, powerful. She was no longer just going through the motions, she was becoming the motion. Camera's breath deepened as she transitioned into basic strikes. Her fists cut through the air with precision, faster, harder. The sound of her blows was sharp against the silence of the dojo. She didn't stop when the burn in her muscles started to sting. Instead, she embraced it, pushing herself further with every repetition. Her mind cleared as she moved. No more thoughts of Jake or the way he'd made her feel small. No more self-doubt or fear of the next time he'd taunt her in the halls. The fight was no longer about them. It was about her. The dojo felt smaller now, the space filling with the sound of her own breath, her body moving in time with the rhythm she had set. She punched and kicked the air, her legs kicking higher, her fists slamming harder, until her body was covered in a light sheen of sweat. But the sweat wasn't from fatigue, it was from transformation. Camera wasn't the same girl who had walked in a few hours ago. Her muscles were stronger, her mind sharper. And the confidence that had once been a flicker in the distance was now a fire burning brightly within her. The next day at school, Camera walked with a purpose. She had been quiet for so long, but now, she felt something different. She was no longer afraid. She wasn't the girl who shrank away from the crowd, avoiding the bullies, hoping they wouldn't notice her. Today, they were going to notice her, and she was going to make sure they understood something: she was not a victim. As she walked down the hallway, she caught sight of Jake and his friends near the lockers, laughing and pushing each other. The sight of them made her blood boil, but instead of fear, there was only focus. "Hey, Camera!" Jake called out, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Where's your little boyfriend?" "Hiding in the library with a book, huh?" His friends snickered, and Camera felt the familiar tug of humiliation, but this time, it didn't choke her. She stood tall, squared her shoulders, and looked him directly in the eyes. "Is that the best you can do?" she said, her voice calm, steady, unwavering. Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by her response. "What?" he sneered, stepping closer to her. "You think you can talk to me like that?" Camera's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't back down. She had a choice now, a choice to either let him continue his bullying or to stop it. "Yeah," she said, her voice quiet but filled with an undeniable confidence. "I do." For a moment, Jake seemed to hesitate, confusion flashing in his eyes. His friends shifted uncomfortably, sensing the change in the air. Camera didn't give them time to process it. She stepped around Jake, walking past him with her head held high, not looking back, not letting his words touch her anymore. "You're not worth my time," she muttered, loud enough for them to hear. And then, she walked away. By the time she got home, Camera felt like she could breathe again. The tension from the hallway still lingered, but it wasn't a weight, it was a spark. She had stood her ground. She had fought back. And it had felt good. She went straight to her room, where she unzipped her gym bag and pulled out the small notebook she'd kept for months. It was filled with notes, sketches, and reflections from her time at the dojo. She flipped to a blank page and wrote, "The fight is within me. The first battle is in my own mind." She closed the notebook with a quiet smile, feeling the growth inside her. Her body was becoming stronger, but her mind was sharper still. She had the tools now. The training. The focus. And next time Jake came for her, she would be ready. She wasn't the girl they used to pick on anymore. She was becoming the one who stood her ground. Camera wasn't just learning how to fight physically. She was learning how to fight for herself. And that, she realized, was the most powerful weapon she could ever have. Camera felt the weight of the day pressing down on her like a thick fog. Every step she took felt heavier than the last, each breath an effort to push through the tension that had settled in her chest. The halls of the school were familiar, but they had become a battleground in recent weeks. The taunts. The laughter. The glances. Jake and his crew were relentless, and it seemed like there was no escape. She had tried to fade into the background, to make herself invisible, to avoid their notice. But that had never worked. It never would. The bullying had only escalated, turning her every school day into a nightmare. They were clever about it, picking at her weaknesses, exploiting every insecurity. Camera had become numb to the words, but the way they looked at her, the way they smiled when they thought she was too weak to fight back, it was the thing that hurt the most. She was tired. Tired of hiding, tired of pretending like it didn't affect her, tired of shrinking away. She had let the silence stretch for too long. And today, as she walked through the schoolyard, she knew something had to change. Jake was there, of course. He always was, with his two lackeys by his side. They were laughing, looking around, waiting for their next victim to come into view. Camera had seen them from across the yard, and for the first time, something inside her stirred, not fear, not dread, but a quiet sense of resolve. She wasn't going to be the victim anymore. She stopped in her tracks, a few steps away from the trio. Jake noticed her immediately, the usual smirk creeping across his face. "Well, well, well," Jake said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look who it is. Camera, the ghost. Thought you could hide from us, huh?" Camera didn't flinch. She stood tall, her posture straightening, her eyes narrowing just enough to let them know she was no longer afraid. The ground beneath her feet felt solid, and the air around her, thick with the sounds of the schoolyard, seemed to pulse with energy. She had never felt so aware of herself. "Come on," one of Jake's friends mocked, taking a step toward her. "You gonna cry now, Camera? That's what you do, isn't it? You just cry and hide, like always." Camera's jaw clenched, but she didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She had been silent for too long. She had allowed them to speak for her, to label her, to define her. But no more. "You think you can keep doing this to me," she finally said, her voice steady but carrying a weight that made even Jake pause for a moment. His smile faltered just slightly. "What, you want to fight back now? You're not gonna make it 5 seconds, camera. You should know your place." Camera's heart beat a little faster, but she didn't back down. "I'm done running," she said quietly, her words cutting through the air with a sharpness that surprised even her. Jake and his friends laughed loudly, arrogantly. They thought she was playing a game. They thought she was desperate, trying to make a show of bravery. But in her chest, Camera felt a surge of something new. Something raw. She wasn't just speaking words anymore, she was backing them up. "You want a fight, Camera?" Jake said, his voice suddenly low, his posture shifting to one of mock seriousness. "You really think you stand a chance?" "I don't think," Camera said, her voice quiet but firm. "I know." The air around them seemed to freeze for a moment. Jake's expression shifted from amusement to something more calculating. He was trying to figure out if she was bluffing. But Camera was done bluffing. She was done being afraid of him and his friends. Without another word, Camera moved quick, too quick for Jake to even react. Her foot swept under the first guy's legs, and he crumpled to the ground with a loud thud, his face hitting the dirt. The second guy barely had time to raise his hands before she had already spun behind him, delivering a sharp, controlled strike to his back that sent him stumbling forward, gasping for air. Jake's eyes widened in shock, his confident smirk falling away as he realized she wasn't the weak, quiet girl he had thought her to be. Camera moved with precision, her body flowing seamlessly from one move to the next, her reflexes honed and instinctive. She wasn't using brute force, she was using technique, skill, speed. Each strike was a calculated move, each block an act of careful defense. "You what the hell?" Jake started, his voice shaking, but Camera didn't give him a chance to finish. She stepped forward, pivoting on her foot and delivering a swift punch to his gut. The impact left him gasping, his hands instinctively clutching his abdomen. Camera's eyes never left his face, not even as his friends struggled to regain their bearings, groaning on the ground behind her. She was still in control. She could feel the rush of adrenaline, the heat of the fight, but it was like a fog had lifted. This was no longer about defending herself. This was about proving a point. "Listen," Camera said, her voice cutting through the quiet that had descended over the yard. "You don't get to push me around anymore. You don't get to make me feel small." Jake, now winded, tried to stand but faltered, his legs unsteady. His face was flushed with a mixture of anger and disbelief. He had never imagined that Camera would be able to fight back, let alone take him down so effortlessly. For the first time, he saw her for what she really was, not the weak target he had expected, but someone with real power. Camera stood over him, her breath slow and controlled, her heart still pounding but not out of fear. "You'll never get away with it," she said, her tone final. "Not anymore." For a moment, there was complete silence. The schoolyard, usually a place of noise and chaos, now felt still, like everyone was holding their breath. Even the students who had gathered to watch the confrontation were quiet, their eyes wide with a mix of shock and awe. They hadn't expected this, no one had. Camera had shown them a side of herself that they didn't even know existed. Jake slowly stood, his gaze fixed on Camera. His eyes were no longer filled with mockery, they were filled with something else. Something deeper, more dangerous. But Camera didn't flinch. She didn't need to. She had made her point. "You're not as tough as you think, Jake," she said, turning her back on him. She didn't need to look back to know that Jake was seething with rage. She could feel the weight of his fury burning into her, but it didn't matter. She had done what she needed to do. She had shown them all that she wasn't someone to be underestimated anymore. The crowd of students slowly dispersed, some of them whispering, others still too stunned to speak. Camera walked away, her body moving with the same calm determination as it always had, but now, her head held high. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Camera never imagined that one fight would change everything. Before that day, she was invisible. The kind of girl who blended into the background, who kept to herself, who flew under the radar of both admiration and scorn. She had been the quiet one, the girl with the oversized glasses and unremarkable style. People didn't notice her unless they were picking on her. She wasn't popular, she wasn't a target, and for a long time, she thought that was the safest way to survive high school. But that was before. The fight with Nicole had been a moment of rage, a release that Camera didn't even know she was capable of. It had been the culmination of months, years, even, of pent-up frustration and humiliation. That slap, the one Nicole had delivered without hesitation, the one that sent her tumbling to the floor, had broken something inside Camera. In the space of an instant, the quiet girl disappeared, replaced by someone unfamiliar, someone stronger, someone capable of standing her ground. The transformation was not just physical, but emotional. Her body had moved before her brain, instinct driving her to lash out, to show Nicole and everyone else that she would not be a victim anymore. Now, the entire school knew. The halls buzzed with the story. It spread like wildfire, from one whispered conversation to another, from the lunchroom to the hallways, from the classrooms to the buses. Camera had gone from being the shy, overlooked girl to the subject of intense fascination. People were talking about her. The quiet girl who had been pushed around for years was suddenly a force to be reckoned with. Camera wasn't sure how to feel about that. It was strange, hearing her name spoken with a mix of awe and fear. In the past, when someone said her name, it was always followed by some insult or cruel joke, a snicker at her expense. Now, there was a new weight to it. Some students whispered about her with respect. Some even admired her. There were rumors about her strength, about how she had taken down Nicole in a way no one had expected. Camera had never been in the center of anything before, and it felt overwhelming. But the shift wasn't just in the way people spoke about her, it was in the way they acted around her. The bullies who had once tormented her now seemed to avoid her. They no longer threw snide comments her way or made her the butt of their jokes. When Camera walked into a room, they seemed to shrink away. Nicole, who used to be the queen bee, the one who had dominated the social hierarchy with a combination of cruelty and charm, was suddenly sidelined. It wasn't just because of the fight. It was because Camera had shown them all something they didn't expect: she could stand her ground, and she wouldn't back down. The respect wasn't universal, though. There were still whispers behind her back, still looks of distrust from those who didn't understand the shift, from those who saw her as a threat rather than an ally. Camera had gone from being an invisible target to someone people either feared or admired. The balance had tipped, and now it felt as though the scales were teetering dangerously close to an edge. But what scared Camera the most was the feeling that she wasn't sure which side of the scale she was on. Was she the girl who had found power through rage, or had she become someone different altogether, someone capable of violence, someone capable of doing things she hadn't thought herself capable of before? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Camera. A voice called from behind her. Camera turned to find her best friend, Lila, hurrying to catch up. Lila was out of breath, her eyes wide with excitement. "Did you hear?" she asked, practically bouncing on her feet. "You're like the talk of the school." Camera rolled her eyes, though a small, hesitant smile tugged at her lips. "I've noticed." Lila grinned, her face lighting up. "No, seriously. Everyone's talking about you. It's like you're some kind of legend now. People are actually respecting you. And Nicole," she paused dramatically, "she's practically avoiding you." Camera let out a small laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't want this," she said quietly, her voice betraying a sense of unease. "I didn't want to be the center of attention, Lila. I didn't want to be some kind of symbol." Lila's expression softened. She placed a hand on Camera's shoulder, her tone serious now. "I get it. But you don't have to apologize for standing up for yourself. You've been through so much, Camera. This isn't about being violent. It's about you taking control of your life." Camera nodded slowly, though the doubt still lingered. The fight had been a release, yes, but it had also been the beginning of something she wasn't sure she was ready for. She had stepped into a new role, one that had the potential to either lift her up or destroy everything she had worked to avoid. The pain from losing her hair was still raw, a constant reminder of the cruel joke her classmates had played on her months ago. Every time she caught sight of herself in the mirror, she was reminded of what she had lost, of what she could never get back. But now, when she looked at herself, she saw something else, too. She saw strength. She saw power. And that terrified her. Camera had always seen herself as the quiet girl, the one who didn't fight back, the one who let things slide in order to survive. But that girl was fading. She was becoming someone new, someone who had the courage to stand her ground, even if it meant facing the consequences. She wasn't sure who that person was, or if she even liked her, but she knew one thing for sure: she was no longer the girl who let people walk all over her. As Camera walked down the hallway, the murmurs followed her. Some were admiring, some fearful. She could feel their eyes on her, could hear their whispered conversations as she passed. They were trying to figure her out, trying to decide whether she was a hero or a villain. Camera didn't know how to answer that, and truthfully, she didn't want to. All she wanted was to move forward, to embrace her new identity without losing herself in the process. The past couldn't be undone, and she couldn't go back to being the girl who let people hurt her. But neither did she want to be defined by the fight, by the violence that had sparked her transformation. She didn't want to be feared, but she also didn't want to be someone's punching bag. For now, she would embrace this new strength, this new power. She would let the world see her as more than the quiet girl she had been. She would show them that she was someone who could hold her ground, no matter what. Camera wasn't sure what came next, but one thing was clear: she would never be the same again. She had found something in herself that she hadn't known existed, a well of power and potential, buried deep beneath the quiet surface. And she was ready to see where it would take her. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, Camera stood tall, her head held high. Whatever came next, she was ready for it. She would no longer hide in the shadows. She would no longer be the quiet girl. The world knew who she was now, and Camera was starting to like what she saw in the mirror. Camera stood in front of the full-length mirror in the dojo, her eyes scanning her reflection. The physical changes were obvious: her muscles were more defined, her stance more solid, her movements more fluid. The result of years of training, of mastering the art of martial combat. She had proven herself on the outside, but inside, there was still a battle raging. The bullies had fallen away, their cruel taunts and threats fading into nothingness as she had learned to defend herself. At least physically, she was untouchable. But now, as she stood in the quiet of the dojo after hours, Camera knew that the real fight was something far more insidious. It was the war she'd been fighting with herself, the one she hadn't been able to outrun no matter how fast she moved or how many punches she threw. It had been almost a year since her mother's death, and the grief still clung to her like a shadow. Every day, it felt like she was carrying an invisible weight, one that no amount of physical strength could alleviate. She hadn't been able to let go. Not fully. And then there was her father. Her relationship with him had been fractured ever since her mother passed. He was distant, locked away in his own sorrow, and Camera had never been able to reach him. Their conversations, when they happened, were awkward and strained, like they were both afraid of what they might say if they let their walls down. Was this really all there was to life? Camera's thoughts were interrupted as her instructor, Sensei Kaido, approached. The older man was known for his quiet wisdom, his steady presence in the dojo. He never pushed, never rushed, but somehow, he always knew when she needed guidance. "You've been here for hours," he said, his voice calm, but with an edge of concern. "What are you running from today?" Camera didn't answer immediately. She focused instead on her own hands, the calluses that had formed from gripping weapons, the way her fingers twitched, almost instinctively, as though they were itching for a fight. But this wasn't about fighting. This wasn't about punching or kicking. She had learned that much. No, this was about something deeper, something she had been avoiding for far too long. "I'm not running," Camera finally replied, her voice softer than usual. "But I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore." Sensei Kaido regarded her with a long, measured look. "You've been avoiding something. I can see it in your eyes." "What is it?" Camera looked at the floor. "I don't know. Maybe everything. Ever since she died, I've just been lost. And my dad, he's barely even here anymore." "Your mother's death was a great loss, Camera."